only watched one episode of the Twilight Zone before I watched more to prepare for today's service. Many of you may remember the show itself, discrete half-hour episodes, each one envisioning a possible future, bookended by narration by its creator, Rod Serling. In the one I remember watching with my father years ago, a librarian, played by Burgess Meredith, is taken before the Chancellor of the State on a charge of obsolescence. The state is in control in this future that might be. The narration says that the state is a fascistic, violent entity. The librarian is so charged because of his work with books, themselves an illegal and obsolete thing. One only needs to know what the state tells one, and also because of his belief in God. There's no need for God. The state has proved God's non-existence. Of course, the librarian is found guilty and is put to death, and there's more to the episode than that. But what I remembered most strongly was that word as the Chancellor declared it so stridently. Obsolete. You, Romney Wordsworth, he says, are obsolete. Wordsworth is obsolete because the things in which he believes, books, the Bible, stories, information, and access to knowledge, those things are considered irrelevant or even heretical, a threat to the efficiency of the state. The Chancellor says at least a few times, if you cannot produce, if you serve no purpose in the dystopian future of this episode, your life is meaningless, over, obsolete. Of course, we might watch this episode and not consider that it has anything to do with technology, as we use that word colloquially so often, but I think we would be mistaken. I think it is about technology. As you know, I trained as a medievalist, and much is made, of course, of the changes wrought in Western society and culture by the invention of the printing press. That machine which enabled a move away from hand-copied manuscripts and into something we might describe as mass production. It is, of course, a piece of technology, the very piece of technology that leads to the existence of Wordsworth's precious books. But the printing press began a revolution in knowledge. With the ability to replicate books cheaply and comparatively quickly, information, stories, anything that could be written down and copied became accessible in a way never before seen in Western history. The decisiveness of this technological advancement was, we could argue, on the order of the changes brought about by the earliest use of fire and wheels and clothing, perhaps even electricity and the invention of computing. The printing press truly did change everything. From the way that we think to the way that we learn, it changed the course of human history. And we could even argue that without the printing press, we wouldn't have had the Reformation, and there'd be no rise of Protestantism that gave space and freedom for our Unitarian Universalist liberal faith to develop. Technology is the application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, or machinery and equipment developed from the application of scientific knowledge. Anytime we humans allow our scientific understanding, gained through observation or through experimentation, to guide us in creating something, we are creating technology. So when Homo erectus watched as lightning struck and started fire, and then they learned to harvest fire, they used their scientific knowledge, applied it, and changed the world. So although when we talk about technology, often we think we mean computers, things that run on electricity, iPhones, and so on, we're really talking about each and every large and small step humanity has made forward in making use of our understanding and making our world perhaps not better, but different. And that, the application of science, began as soon as our brains had evolved enough to do science. We began using stone tools some 4 million years ago, using fire some 1.5 million years ago. cooking food about 0.5 million years ago, about 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged. You may remember that Joanna Macy quote we heard earlier in the month about how if we map human existence onto a 24-hour day, Homo sapiens arrive very, very close to midnight. All the things we think of as technology are a blip in human history, cast in a much longer drama of change and growth and development. And each of those changes, from shoes to the Industrial Revolution, has altered our minds, our bodies, our social organization, the ways we spend our time, our access, and ultimately the way we do or do not open our circles wide and create justice. A friend pointed out to me that in truth, we are unrecognizable from humans 10,000 years ago, let alone from the earliest of 300,000 years ago. From the implementation of agricultural techniques to indoor plumbing to electric light, technology has enabled so much, including our ability to move our human existence beyond survival and subsistence and into something deeper and more complex. Because of this, because of all the ways technology is supposed to make our lives easier and better, we often think of it in terms of its efficiency. Will this machine do the work of 10 humans in half the time? Will the war machine kill more quickly and precisely? Will this computer be smaller, faster, more understanding? So when Romney Wordsworth and his books and his God are declared obsolete, we can infer that the state that dominates his world is one that devalues human individuality and human thought. It's a world that devalues anyone and anything that isn't efficient and productive. The same is true in the episode we saw part of this morning, the Brain Center at Whipple's. We showed you the end of that episode. Mr. Whipple has replaced every worker in his factory with a machine in the name of efficiency and progress. Whipple describes some of the implications of this as he says that a man ought to have time for leisure in retirement. This focus on productivity reduces time for leisure, for pleasure, for simply being in the world, pushing those enjoyments out until the working life is over. And at the end of the episode, we see Whipple himself replaced by a robot, and he opines, "It isn't fair, Hanley. It isn't fair how they diminish us." And then Rod Serling's voice comes over, "Too often, man becomes clever instead of becoming wise. He becomes inventive but not thoughtful. And sometimes, as in the case of Mr. Whipple, he can create himself right out of existence." It's a tale, the narrator tells us, of oddness and obsolescence. And that's the crux of it. We humans have a somewhat fearful relationship to technology and machinery, especially robots, even as the creation and use of technology seems coded into our collective existence. While Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek could imagine the world benefiting gloriously from machines that make survival a given and that invite us instead into a life of pursuing higher things, the Twilight Zone has a number of episodes that explore the fear that machines and technology will render humanity obsolete. That technology and machinery will overtake us in the name of efficiency and productivity and will leave us miserable and railing, crying out, left trying to remind one another that we have worth, that we have value. You may or may not know, though perhaps the language of the clip we watched made you suspect, that Rod Serling, creator of The Twilight Zone and author of many of its episodes, including the 2 described already, was a Unitarian Universalist, a very committed one at that. He was politically active, congregationally active, and Serling used the platform of his show to explore themes of prejudice, but also themes central to that first principle of ours. We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Episodes of The Twilight Zone were cautionary tales, stories that offered a vision of what might be if we failed to embrace the truth of our own worth and the worth of others. There's an online database of Unitarian Universalists, and in the entry on Rod Serling, they share this quote from him. He said, "I happen to think that the singular evil of our time is prejudice. It is from this evil that all other evils grow and multiply. In almost everything I've written, there is a thread of this, a man's seemingly palpable need to dislike someone other than himself." Serling read history, thought through his own experience of war, and looked at the world around him, and he saw humans drawing lines of hate, using tools of destruction, and living lives with tightly drawn circles and a lack of care for other human beings. Serling was mindful of the same thing that Martin Luther King Jr. was mindful of when he accepted his Nobel Peace Prize with these words, quote, "This evening, I would like to use this lofty and historic platform to discuss what appears to me to be the most pressing problem confronting mankind today. Modern man has brought this whole world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. He has reached new and astonishing peaks of scientific success. He has produced machines that think and instruments that peer into the unfathomable ranges of interstellar space. He's built gigantic bridges to span the seas and gargantuan buildings to kiss the skies. His airplanes and spaceships have dwarfed distance, placed time in chains, and carved highways through the stratosphere. This is a dazzling picture of modern man's scientific and technological progress. Yet in spite of these spectacular strides in science and technology, and still unlimited ones to come, something basic is missing." King continues, "There's a sort of poverty of the spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our scientific and technological abundance. The richer we become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers." A couple of Sundays ago, I misquoted King with other words, often attributed also to Einstein, though that is another misattribution. That quote, whose origin is fuzzy, goes something like this and encapsulates what King said in that acceptance speech: "I fear our technology has outstripped our humanity." The fear we face when it comes to our own innovation is both that we will render ourselves obsolete through our ingenuity, and that we will invent things that either through our use of them diminish our humanity or diminish the humanity of others. These fears are not unfounded, of course. We have, as predicted by the Twilight Zone, transitioned plenty of jobs over to machines, creating exactly the scenario of the Whipple factory. We have also created over and over again the means of mass destruction and death dealing. The anonymity of our war machines afford us the anonymity our war machines afford us enables us to harm one another with less ready guilt and shame. This diminishes our own humanity, even as it denies the value of the life of another. Our technological advancements have been so often in the service of prejudice and hate, so often prioritizing efficiency and progress and product. So it's sensible that we might fear them, have this love-hate relationship with them. As we move further into our shared future and we continue to understand the human computer that is our brains, as we further develop AI, even more fears and questions come into play. Namely, what makes a being sentient? What makes a being of value? What gives worth? If Rod Serling imagined what a future of machines might look like, Black Mirror looks at what a future in which our bodies can be denied, escaped, and blocked by others looks like. Like the Twilight Zone, Black Mirror offers individual episodes that explore possible futures. Like its predecessor, which inspired it, Black Mirror uses suspense and twists to engage in questions of ethics and morality. It is a bit less preachy than Serling's work. In the clip we watched, John Hamm explains what a cookie is. It's a digital replica of a person's consciousness, kept inside that small egg. The concept of digital versions of a self, these copies of code that approximate a brain, is explored through multiple episodes. And the question at stake, of course, is whether or not a digital replica, stripped of a material body, is still human. Is it merely a facsimile hot off the modern day printing press? Does a copy possess the same value as an original? Does our feeling change when that copy has no form? Or when the copy or robot or bit of artificial intelligence clearly has feelings? I will readily admit that I find Black Mirror very hard to watch, especially episodes like this one that work through the captivity of entities that in every way seem human. In the world of the episode, of course, though the cookie can feel pain and can feel anguish, it's treated as just a replica, possessed of less meaning and value and worth than the original. It's put in service of its original, in this case, as the operator of smart home technology. The company that developed the cookies is called Smartelligence, and John Hamm's character does the work of acclimating the cookie to its new location and its new work. But again, of course, the question arises if the humans of this vision of the future have grown more clever and less wise, losing their humanity in search of ease. Another character in this episode calls John Hamm's character a monster, immoral, inhumane. It all depends on what you understand as human and how you value each life, regardless of how that life was made, what it produces, or what higher good it serves. What will future technology do to us humans? How will it change our bodies and minds, societies and structures? How might it change our values? I don't pretend to have an answer to any of those questions. What I have are the same conflicting and confused ideas that many of us have. I am eternally grateful for the technologies, medical and reproductive, that have enabled my life, my children's lives, all of your lives. These technologies will be our salvation from the current crisis we find ourselves in. I'm incredibly grateful for the technologies in learning and education and information that have enabled my study, my faith, my work, my escape into books, my ability to connect with friends across the world. My life and my experience and my world is larger, more diverse, more complex and beautiful, and more full of pursuits of the mind and spirit because of technology. And yet I fear the day my children want social media, because the anonymity so often leads to cruelty, because a person's value is reduced to the image they carefully curate and project through the screen. And I hate the long ago first invention of war machines and all those that have come along that brought us the atomic bomb and drone strikes and death beyond our imagining. It's those machines that allow us and even encourage us to create those imagined boundary lines between humans and to defend them at all costs. I worry about what artificial intelligence will mean for the future of our world. I've probably seen one too many post-apocalyptic movies in which the machines come to prominence. And as you know, I have been concerned for some time with the notion that life is about production, efficiency, and acquisition. Too often technology is put in service of these false idols, and I worry that rather than correcting for this, we're getting worse. And in spite of all of that, I do actually have hope. I relentlessly, willfully, doggedly have hope that we can be better. Voices like Serling's, alongside all the others we've explored this month so far, give me that hope. Hope that humanity can continue to evolve and begin to place ever more thought and care into the way it applies scientific knowledge to the creation of machines. Ultimately, the Twilight Zone and Black Mirror ask the same thing of us. to quit blindly advancing technology without forethought and without engagement in the ethical questions inherent in its creation. I've said before that technology itself is in many ways neutral. It's what we do with it, what service we put it toward. In our human hands, technology acquires a moral cast. Our past offers mixed reviews on the human ability to turn technology toward good. Yes, we've advanced so much that is beneficial, but we've also created so much destruction. So what now? As humanity invents and creates at speeds we've never seen before, will we find in technology the wonder and metaphor and expansiveness of the universe? Will we use it to open our circles wide, advance our collective humanity, heal our wounds, and create a better future? I certainly hope so. And this ethical way of using technology begins, I think, with never losing our sense of place in the scheme of things. To bend technology toward the good requires remembering both our finitude and our power. And it requires staying deeply committed to the worth of every being. Each being has value, worth. To diminish another is to diminish ourselves. I want to close today by offering you more words from that Tracy K. Smith poem, My God, It's Full of Stars. This is the final part. She writes, when my father worked on the Hubble telescope, he said they operated like surgeons, scrubbed and sheathed in papery green, the room a clean cold, a bright white. He'd read Larry Niven at home and drink scotch on the rocks, his eyes exhausted and pink. These were the Reagan years, when we lived with our finger on the button and struggled to view our enemies as children. My father spent whole seasons bowing before the oracle eye, hungry for what it would find. His face lit up whenever anyone asked, and his arms would rise as if he were weightless, perfectly at ease in the never-ending night of space. On the ground, we tied postcards to balloons for peace. Prince Charles married Lady Di. Rock Hudson died. We learned new words for things. The decade changed. The first few pictures came back blurred, and I felt ashamed for all the cheerful engineers, my father and his tribe. The second time, the optics jibed. We saw to the edge of all there is. So brutal and alive, it seemed to comprehend us back. May we find ways to live into our smallness and into our greatness, never forgetting our place in the universe and committed to comprehending one another and affirming each other's worth. So may it be.